Every empire believes its currency will last forever, until the moment it collapses. The Romans were certain their denarius was unbreakable. British were convinced the pound sterling would rule global trade for centuries. And today the world treats the US dollar as if it is immune to history. But currencies do not survive because they are powerful. They survive because the world still trusts them. And when that trust fades, even the strongest currency begins to fall. What you're about to hear is not a prediction. It is the same seven-stage pattern that every global currency has followed for nearly 2,000 years. And the US dollar is now deep into the very last stages. For all great currencies, the story begins with real strength. Every dominant empire starts by producing more, trading more, and innovating faster than its rivals. Rome built roads, aqueducts, and armies that reshaped the ancient world. The denarius became trusted because Rome was productive and disciplined. Centuries later, the Dutch built the world's most advanced ships. Their merchants traded across continents, and their banking system became the most stable in Europe. The Dutch guilder became the global currency simply because the Dutch economy was strong. Then came the British. Their industrial revolution turned them into the world's factory. Their navy controlled the seas, as their banks financed global trade. The pound sterling became the world's currency because Britain earned that privilege through productivity and power. After World War II, the United States rose in the same way. Its factories produced half of the world's goods. Its military protected global trade routes. Its gold reserves were larger than every other nation combined. When the world rebuilt after the war, it relied on American strength. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, leaders from 44 nations agreed. The US dollar would become the world's new reserve currency. Every major country would use dollars to trade, save, and price global commodities. This moment transformed the world. It gave the United States a unique form of power, one no empire had ever possessed so completely. The US could borrow cheaply, spend endlessly, and fund global trade simply by creating more of its own currency. But this privilege also planted the first seeds of decline. When a currency becomes the world's reserve, the empire enters a golden age. Borrowing becomes cheaper. Prosperity rises. Standards of living increase. The Dutch experienced this, as their citizens became the wealthiest in Europe. The British experienced it during the Victorian era, as global trade enriched the empire. The United States experienced its own golden age after World War II. High-paying jobs, affordable homes, booming innovation, it was the greatest economic expansion in modern history. Prosperity seemed permanent. The dollar was solid. The economy was strong, but beneath the rise of every empire, the same shift always occurs. Production begins to decline, while consumption rises. Nations become comfortable. They begin to borrow instead of build. They outsource instead of innovate. They spend more than they produce. And slowly, the foundations that created the strong currency begin to weaken. This leads to the next stage: overstretch. Empires expand their ambitions. They build larger militaries, increase government spending, and create programs that future generations must somehow pay for. Rome spent enormous sums to support distant legions. Britain financed global wars and colonial administration. The United States built the largest military network in history, expanded social programs, and borrowed heavily to support its lifestyle. Debt rose faster than economic output. Manufacturing declined. And the empire became increasingly dependent on the world buying its currency and its debt. The illusion of strength remained, but the economic engine was quietly weakening. Eventually, every empire reaches a moment where it cannot afford its own expenses. Taxes are not enough. Borrowing becomes too large. Governments turn to the final tool they always use: money printing. Rome reduced the silver content of its coins. The coins looked the same, but their real value fell. Prices rose. Confidence sank. Britain inflated its currency heavily after World War I and World War II, and eventually abandoned the gold standard. The United States followed the same path. In 1971, the dollar was removed from the gold standard because the government could not pay for rising debt, rising war costs, and rising social spending while maintaining the currency's gold backing. From that moment on, the dollar was backed only by trust, not by gold, not by silver, not by anything tangible. And once a currency relies purely on trust, the countdown begins. After 2008, the United States printed trillions to rescue financial markets. After 2020, the printing reached unprecedented levels. More dollars were created in a few years than had been printed in the entire previous century. And like every empire before it, the US entered the stage where money printing becomes normal. Inflation rises, savings lose value, the currency weakens, and slowly the world begins searching for alternatives. This leads to the most dangerous stage, the loss of trust. When foreign nations sense that a currency is weakening, they begin to move away from it. For Britain, this happened after World War II when nations shifted from the pound to the dollar. The British Empire entered a long, steady decline. For the United States, this is happening now. Countries like China, Russia, Brazil, India, and Saudi Arabia are trading more in their own currencies. Central banks around the world are reducing their dollar holdings and increasing gold reserves. New alliances are forming to bypass the US dollar in global trade. The world is not abandoning the dollar suddenly. It is drifting away from it gradually. Just as it drifted away from the British pound a century ago. Decline happens slowly at first, then suddenly all at once. When trust disappears completely, the final stage begins, the currency reset. Rome experienced hyperinflation so severe that soldiers refused to accept the denarius and demanded payment in gold. Trade collapsed. The empire never recovered its financial power. Britain experienced a 70% loss in the value of the pound in the decades after World War II. Once the world turned to the dollar, Britain could no longer sustain its empire. The United States is not at the final stage yet, but the warning signs are unmistakable. Record levels of national debt, persistent inflation, declining manufacturing capacity, global fragmentation, and a world increasingly searching for alternatives to US leadership. The fall of a reserve currency does not mean a nation disappears. Rome still exists, Britain still exists. But they do not hold the power they once did. The same fate may await the United States. The dollar will not vanish in a single day. It will weaken gradually, lose influence, and eventually be replaced by a new global financial system, whether that is a multi-currency world, a commodity-backed system, or a digital reserve asset. History has never allowed a single reserve currency to last forever. The dollar will not be the first exception. Empires do not collapse because of outside enemies. They collapse because of internal choices. Too much debt, too much spending, too much complacency, and too much trust in the belief that this time is different. But history does not bend to belief. It repeats because human behavior repeats. Currencies rise, peak, decline, and fall, according to the same pattern that has held for 2,000 years. The US dollar remains powerful today. Power built on trust can shift quickly, and the world is already preparing for that shift. Understanding this cycle is not about predicting doom. It is about recognizing change. Because when reserve currencies fall, wealth does not disappear. It moves from one asset, one system, and eventually, one empire to another. And those who understand the cycle early are the ones who adapt the fastest. History does not repeat itself word for word, but it rhymes with perfect accuracy. And today, the echoes of past empires are growing louder. The question is not whether the dollar will follow the pattern. The question is how far along the pattern we already are.